The Alpha King had broken enemies with his claws, defended kingdoms with his strength, and carried the weight of an ancient crown for longer than most wolves could imagine. But no one who stood beside him on that cold autumn morning would ever remember his victories as clearly as they remembered the instant his spear slipped from his hand. They would remember the young Omega kneeling in the crimson grass, her pale hair tangled by the wind, her simple gray dress soaked with rain and stained with the blood of a child she refused to abandon. They would remember the silence that followed. They would remember that even the strongest alpha in the north forgot to breathe. But none of them knew how the story had truly begun. 12 hours earlier, Arya Whitmore had been walking alone through the forbidden forest with nothing more than a worn satchel and a promise she had made to herself years ago. Wherever she found suffering, she would never turn away. Being an unclaimed Omega meant surviving on the edges of every territory. No pack wanted the responsibility of protecting someone they believed was weak, and no council cared whether a lonely Omega found food before winter arrived. Arya had long accepted that the forest was kinder than many wolves. Trees did not judge. Rivers did not whisper. The wind never reminded her that she belonged nowhere. She paused beside a narrow stream, kneeling to refill a small wooden flask, when the forest fell strangely quiet. Birds vanished into the sky. Even the leaves seemed to stop moving. Every instinct told her danger was near. Then she heard it. A tiny cry. Weak. Frightened. Barely more than a whisper carried by the breeze. Arya stood immediately. She followed the sound through tangled roots and thorn-covered branches until she reached a clearing where broken feathers covered the ground like black snow. Deep claw marks scarred the earth. Something terrible had happened there only moments before. At the center of the clearing lay a little wolf cub in human form, no older than 7 years old. His silver hair was damp with rain, his breathing shallow, one small hand clutching a carved wooden wolf as though it were the only thing keeping him connected to home. Arya dropped to her knees beside him. "Hey, you are safe now," she whispered softly. The boy's eyelids fluttered. His frightened blue eyes searched her face without recognition. "Mama," he murmured. The single word shattered something inside her heart. Arya gently brushed damp hair away from his forehead. "No, sweetheart," she answered with a trembling smile. "But I will stay with you." She quickly examined his injuries. The wounds were serious, yet what frightened her more was the strange dark marks spreading beneath the skin near his shoulder. Poison. Whatever creature had attacked him had left more than claws behind. She searched the clearing for herbs she knew could slow infection, crushing green leaves between her fingers before carefully pressing them against the wound. The little boy cried softly but did not pull away. "You are very brave," Arya whispered. "Just keep looking at me." For a moment his breathing steadied. Then distant screeches echoed through the trees. Arya slowly lifted her head. High above the forest canopy, enormous winged shadows circled against the gray sky. Shadow hawks. Predators that rarely left survivors once they claimed their prey. They had come back to finish what they had started. Arya knew she should hide. She should run. She should leave before they found her too. An unclaimed Omega had no chance against creatures that even experienced alpha hunters feared. Yet when she looked down at the frightened child trying so desperately to stay awake, the choice disappeared. She carefully lifted him into her arms. He was lighter than she expected, trembling from cold and exhaustion. His small fingers instinctively clung to the fabric of her dress. "I will get you home," she promised, even though she had no idea where his home was. Above them, another piercing cry split the sky. Branches shook violently as dark wings descended through the clouds. Arya tightened her hold on the cub and ran into the deepest part of the forest, unaware that every step she took was carrying her toward the kingdom of the most feared Alpha King alive, and toward the moment that would change all of their lives forever. Arya did not look back. The pounding of her heart was already loud enough without counting the cries echoing above the towering pines. Every instinct born into an Omega urged her to hide, to curl beneath the roots of an ancient tree and pray the predators would pass. But another instinct, older and stronger, refused to let the frightened cub slip from her arms. The little boy shivered against her chest, his breathing uneven as he struggled to remain awake. "Stay with me," Arya whispered. "You are doing so well." His tiny fingers tightened weakly around the carved wooden wolf before relaxing again. The forest floor became steeper as she hurried downhill toward a narrow river she remembered crossing the previous spring. If she could reach the water, perhaps the rushing current would hide their scent long enough to escape the shadow hawks circling overhead. A sudden gust swept through the trees. Massive wings cut across the gray sky, sending leaves spiraling through the air. Arya darted beneath a fallen oak just as sharp talons struck the ground where she had been standing only a heartbeat before. She held the cub close, covering his head with her cloak while the enormous bird-like predator let out a piercing cry of frustration. It searched the clearing for only a moment before lifting back into the sky, convinced its prey could not have disappeared so quickly. Arya remained perfectly still until silence slowly returned. Only then did she crawl from beneath the fallen trunk. Her knees trembled, but she forced herself forward. Fear could wait. The child could not. After nearly an hour of walking, the poison spreading beneath the cub's skin had darkened. His face had grown pale, and his breaths came in soft, shallow waves. Arya stopped beside the riverbank and gently lowered him onto a bed of moss. She soaked a clean cloth in the icy water before carefully wiping the dirt from his forehead. As the cool fabric touched his skin, his eyes fluttered open again. "Are we home?" he asked quietly. Arya smiled, even though her own eyes filled with tears. "Not yet," she answered. "But we are getting closer." He looked at her with the innocent trust only children possess. "You smell like flowers," he whispered. "Mama always says flowers mean spring comes back." Arya's breath caught. She had no answer for that. Instead, she squeezed his little hand. "Then let us believe spring is waiting for both of us." The boy managed the smallest smile before drifting back into uneasy sleep. As Arya prepared another bundle of crushed healing herbs, something caught her attention. Hanging beneath the child's shirt was a silver pendant engraved with a crescent moon surrounding the head of a wolf. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, unlike anything an ordinary family could afford. She frowned, trying to remember where she had seen the symbol before, but another distant cry interrupted her thoughts. The shadow hawks had found their trail again. There was no more time to rest. She wrapped the pendant back beneath the boy's clothing, lifted him into her arms, and continued through the forest until the sun disappeared behind heavy clouds. Hours passed. Rain began to fall, turning the narrow paths into slippery streams of mud. Arya stumbled more than once, scraping her hands against rough stone, yet each time she tightened her hold on the cub before worrying about herself. By dusk, exhaustion settled deep into her bones. She had carried the child for miles without food or rest, but giving up never crossed her mind. Suddenly, voices drifted through the trees ahead. Deep voices. Armed wolves. Arya's heart leaped with hope. She hurried toward them, believing she had finally found help. Then she stepped into the clearing and froze. More than 20 armored alpha warriors surrounded her in a single practiced movement, their swords already drawn. At their center stood a towering man dressed in black armor, trimmed with silver. His golden eyes locked onto the blood-covered cub in her arms before slowly rising to meet hers. The air itself seemed to grow heavier beneath his presence. One warrior gasped. Another lowered his head in disbelief. Then someone whispered words that made every weapon lift toward Arya at once. "My king, she is holding Prince Lucian." The words settled over the clearing like winter frost. Even the rain seemed quieter. Beta Marcus lowered his spear by a fraction, disbelief replacing anger as the royal healer carefully examined the prince once more. Kale remained motionless beside Arya, his sharp gaze fixed on the dark veins slowly spreading beneath the child's pale skin. "How long?" the healer asked without looking up. "When did you find him?" Arya answered immediately. "Just after sunrise. He was alone near Black Feather Ridge. Shadow hawks were still there. I frightened them away." The old healer glanced toward the torn wounds covering her forearms. "Those scratches?" Arya nodded. "They attacked me when I tried to reach him." Marcus frowned. "One Omega fought shadow hawks. I did not fight to win," Arya replied quietly. "I fought long enough to carry him away." The healer carefully unwrapped the bundle of crushed herbs secured around the prince's shoulder. His weathered eyebrows lifted in surprise. "Who prepared these?" "I did." "You know mountain fever herbs?" Arya hesitated. "An old healer taught me years ago." The elderly wolf slowly looked toward his king. "These herbs slowed the poison. Without them, He stopped before finishing the sentence. He did not need to. Every warrior understood. The prince would already have been gone. Silence returned. Marcus's jaw tightened. He wanted to argue, but facts left little room for suspicion. Kale slowly rose to his feet. His towering figure seemed even larger beneath the rain-darkened sky. "Prepare a litter," he ordered. "We return to the capital immediately." Several warriors rushed to obey. Arya carefully adjusted the prince in her arms, ready to place him on the blankets they were unfolding. Before she could move, the little boy stirred once again. His eyelids fluttered open. "No," he whispered weakly. His small fingers searched blindly until they found Arya's sleeve. "Please, do not leave." A murmur spread through the soldiers. Prince Lucian barely seemed aware of the men surrounding him, yet he recognized the Omega who had carried him across the wilderness. Arya gently squeezed his tiny hand. "I am right here," she whispered. "You are safe now." The child managed the faintest smile before slipping back into unconsciousness. Kale watched every second of the exchange. There was no fear in the prince's face when he looked at Arya. No hesitation, only trust. Wolves, especially young cubs, rarely trusted someone who had harmed them. It was instinct older than memory. Something inside the Alpha Kings certainly shifted. Only slightly, but enough for doubt to creep into a heart that had always relied on absolute judgment. As the litter was prepared, one of the scouts sprinted into the clearing, breathing hard. "Your Majesty," he called. "We searched Blackfeather Ridge." Kale turned immediately. "Report." The scout swallowed. "We found signs of shadow hawk nests, and—" He held up a torn piece of black cloth stained with dried blood. Sewn into one corner was the silver crest of the royal guard. Every warrior stared. Marcus stepped closer. "That belonged to Captain Rowan's patrol." The scout nodded grimly. There were signs of a struggle. At least 6 wolves fought there. Kale's expression darkened. Captain Rowan had been assigned to escort the prince that morning. If the patrol had been attacked first, then the official report claiming the prince had simply wandered away could not be true. Someone had lied. The Alpha King's mind began assembling pieces that no longer fit together. "Did you find Captain Rowan?" "No, Your Majesty." "Any survivors?" "None." Before Kale could respond, another voice echoed from the edge of the clearing. "My king." A second messenger arrived on horseback, sliding to the ground before dropping to one knee. "The Elder Council has already received word of the prince's disappearance. Lord Cedric requests that every witness be detained until an official investigation begins." Kale's golden eyes narrowed. "Every witness?" "Yes, Your Majesty." The messenger glanced uneasily toward Arya. "Including the Omega." Arya lowered her head. She had expected as much. An unclaimed Omega would be the easiest person to blame. Marcus watched her carefully, waiting for fear or panic, but instead she quietly reached down to pull the damp blanket higher over the sleeping prince's shoulders, making sure the rain no longer touched his face. She seemed far more concerned about the child than about her own fate. Kale noticed it too. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, in a calm voice that carried across the entire clearing, he gave an order no one had expected. "From this moment forward, Arya Whitmore is under my personal protection. No one questions her. No one touches her. Any challenge to that order is a challenge to the Alpha King himself." Shock rippled through the gathered warriors. Even Marcus stared in silence. But hidden among the trees beyond the clearing, unseen by every wolf present, a cloaked figure watched the scene unfold with cold, calculating eyes. As Kale's soldiers began the journey back toward the royal capital, the stranger quietly whispered into the wind, "She survived. Finish what was started before she remembers who she truly is." The journey back to Ashford Keep began beneath a sky heavy with storm clouds. For warriors carried the prince's litter with extraordinary care, while the royal healer walked beside him, preparing every remedy the ancient traditions could offer. Arya followed quietly a few steps behind until the exhaustion she had ignored for hours finally caught up with her. Her vision blurred. The forest tilted beneath her feet. Before she could steady herself, the world faded into darkness. Kale moved before anyone else. His arm caught her just as she collapsed, preventing her from striking the rocky ground. The warriors exchanged startled glances. Their king had reacted with an instinctive speed usually reserved for members of his own family. "She is burning with fever," the royal healer observed after briefly examining her wrist. Those wounds were never cleaned, and she has carried the prince across nearly 12 miles without food or rest. Marcus folded his arms. She can recover after we reach the capital. The healer slowly looked up. If we wait that long, she may not wake again. Kale did not hesitate. We stop here for 1 hour. Marcus frowned. Your Majesty, the council can wait. Kale's voice carried quiet authority. The prince needs treatment. So does the woman who kept him alive long enough for us to find him. No one argued again. Within minutes, the warriors established a temporary shelter beneath towering cedar trees. Fires were lit, blankets spread across the damp earth, and the healer carefully cleaned the deep scratches covering Arya's arms. She never stirred. Her breathing remained shallow, her face pale against the folded cloak placed beneath her head. As medicinal herbs released their calming scent into the air, the healer examined one wound more closely. His expression changed. These cuts, he murmured. Kale stepped beside him. What is it? Shadowhawk talons normally leave poisoned edges. The old wolf gently touched the healing skin around the deepest scratch. But the poison is gone. Gone? Marcus asked. That is impossible. Not impossible. The healer looked thoughtfully toward Arya. Only unusual. He carefully unwrapped another bandage. Every wound showed the same strange pattern. The flesh around the injuries had begun healing far faster than an ordinary Omegas should. Kale remained silent, though another piece of the puzzle quietly settled into place. Earlier, she had recognized mountain herbs most healers rarely used. She had survived injuries that should have weakened her beyond movement. Now her body seemed to recover with remarkable speed. Who exactly was Arya Whitmore? Before he could ask another question, the prince stirred inside the nearby shelter. The little boy's breathing had become steadier. His eyelids slowly opened. Uncle. Kale immediately knelt beside him. I am here, Lucian. The child's frightened gaze searched the camp until it settled on Arya, still sleeping beneath a blanket only a few yards away. Is she safe? Kale followed the direction of his eyes. Yes. Lucian relaxed visibly. Do not let them blame her, he whispered weakly. She saved me. Marcus froze. Several nearby warriors exchanged astonished looks. The prince had spoken clearly. There was no confusion in his voice this time. Kale gently rested a hand on the child's shoulder. Can you tell me what happened? Lucian closed his eyes as though forcing himself to remember. The guards. His breathing quickened. Someone opened the gate. Kale leaned closer. Who? The little prince frowned in pain. I heard Captain Rowan arguing with someone wearing black. His voice faded until only a whisper remained. The man said the council would soon have a new king. Then exhaustion claimed him once more. Silence settled over the camp. Marcus slowly straightened, his expression no longer filled with certainty, but with growing concern. Captain Rowan had been one of the most trusted officers in the kingdom. If Lucian's memory was true, the attack had not been an accident. It had been planned. Kale rose to his full height, his face harder than stone. He looked toward the dark forest stretching endlessly beyond the firelight. Double the scouts, he ordered. No one enters or leaves this camp without my permission. The warriors immediately obeyed. Hidden far above them, concealed among the branches where even alpha eyes rarely searched, a lone raven spread its wings before disappearing into the gathering night. Bound to its leg was a tiny silver message tube carrying only 7 words. The Omega is alive. The king suspects everything. Dawn arrived wrapped in pale silver mist. The temporary camp stirred quietly as warriors prepared to resume the journey, yet King Kale had not slept. Long after the fires burned low, he had remained seated outside the prince's shelter, replaying every detail in his mind. Captain Rowan, a mysterious man dressed in black. The council, none of it matched the official reports waiting for him in the capital. Someone had begun weaving a lie before the prince was even found. He intended to discover why. Behind him, soft footsteps approached. The royal healer bowed respectfully. She is awake, Your Majesty. Kale turned toward the smaller shelter. Arya sat wrapped in a wool blanket, carefully flexing her bandaged fingers as though surprised they no longer hurt as much. Her golden hair caught the first light of morning, and despite the exhaustion still visible in her face, the quiet kindness in her eyes remained unchanged. When she noticed the king approaching, she immediately stood. I am sorry, she said softly. I did not mean to cause trouble. Kale studied her for a long moment before answering. You collapsed because you carried a child farther than most trained soldiers could have managed. Arya lowered her gaze. He needed someone. And who? Kale asked. Was there to need you? The question caught her off guard. She blinked in surprise. No one had asked about her in years. She gave a faint smile that carried more sadness than joy. No one. Kale said nothing, but the answer lingered between them. Before either could speak again, a cheerful voice interrupted from inside the prince's shelter. Arya. She immediately turned. Little Lucian was awake, struggling to sit upright despite the healer's protests. The moment he saw her, relief spread across his face. You stayed. Arya knelt beside him with a warm smile. I promised I would. The prince reached beneath his blanket and slowly opened his tiny hand. Resting in his palm was the carved wooden wolf he had clutched since the forest. This was my father's, he whispered. He gave it to me before he went to the stars. He carefully placed the carving into Arya's hand. I want you to keep it. Arya's eyes widened. Lucian, this belongs to you. The little prince shook his head. It kept me brave until you found me. He smiled weakly. Now it will remind you that you are never alone. Around the shelter, several warriors quietly looked away. Even Marcus, whose suspicion had begun this journey, remained silent. Kale watched the exchange without interrupting. Trust could not be commanded. It had to be earned. Somehow, in less than a day, this lonely Omega had earned the complete trust of the future king. As the camp prepared to leave, one of the scouts returned at a full sprint, his breathing uneven. He dropped to one knee before Kale. Your Majesty, riders are approaching from the eastern road. Whose banner? Kale asked. The Elder Council. Marcus frowned. Already. The scout nodded. Lord Cedric himself leads them. Less than 10 minutes later, 12 riders emerged from the mist. At their head rode Lord Cedric Blackthorn, dressed in elegant black robes trimmed with silver fur. His silver hair was perfectly arranged despite the long journey, and his smile appeared warm enough to reassure anyone who did not know him well. He dismounted gracefully before offering a respectful bow. Your Majesty, Cedric said. Thank the moon goddess you found the prince alive. His eyes shifted toward Lucian before settling on Arya. Only for the briefest instant did something cold flicker behind his pleasant expression. It vanished so quickly that no ordinary observer would have noticed. But Kale noticed. Cedric stepped closer. I understand this Omega claims she rescued His Highness. Arya remained silent. Claims. Kale repeated calmly. Cedric folded his hands and sighed his sleeves. Surely your Majesty agrees that extraordinary stories deserve careful investigation. An unclaimed Omega appearing beside the missing heir is unfortunate timing. Marcus glanced toward Kale, waiting for his response. Instead, the Alpha King asked a different question. How did you know she was an unclaimed Omega? Cedric's smile faltered almost imperceptibly. The messenger informed us. Kale's golden eyes never left his face. Interesting. Cedric tilted his head. Why? Because the messenger left my camp less than an hour ago. Silence spread between them. Even the horses seemed strangely restless. Kale's voice remained calm, almost conversational. Which means someone informed you about Arya before my own messenger ever reached the capital. For the first time since arriving, Lord Cedric did not answer immediately. And in that single heartbeat, Kale realized the most dangerous enemy in the kingdom might not be hiding in the forest at all. Lord Cedric recovered with remarkable speed. The pleasant smile returned to his face, softer than before, as though Kale had merely asked an innocent question over breakfast. Then I must have misspoken, Cedric replied smoothly. One of the scouts described finding a young woman in plain gray clothing beside the prince. I assumed she was an unclaimed Omega. It was nothing more than an unfortunate guess. Marcus glanced toward Kale. The explanation sounded reasonable enough, yet something about Cedric's tone left an uneasy weight in the air. Kale did not challenge him further. Not here. Not while the prince still needed protection. We will discuss the investigation after Lucian reaches the palace, the king said calmly. Until then, every decision concerning this matter belongs to me. Cedric inclined his head with practiced respect. Of course, your Majesty. His eyes drifted toward Arya once more. I only hope the kingdom does not place its trust too quickly in a stranger. Arya lowered her gaze, refusing to answer. She had no desire to stand between powerful wolves whose lives were shaped by politics she barely understood. To her, there had only ever been one simple truth. A frightened child needed help. Everything else had followed. The procession resumed before sunrise fully broke across the mountains. This time Kale quietly altered the formation. The prince's litter remained at the center, but Arya was no longer asked to walk behind the soldiers. Instead, she rode beside the royal healer under the direct protection of the king's personal guard. Marcus noticed the change, but offered no objection. If Cedric truly knew details he should not have known, then the danger no longer came only from the forest. It might already be traveling with them. Hours later, the towering walls of Ashford Keep emerged from the morning mist. Massive white stone towers stretched toward the sky, their silver banners dancing in the wind. Bells echoed across the valley the moment the sentries recognized the royal standard. Citizens poured into the streets in anxious silence. News of the prince's disappearance had spread through the kingdom overnight. Every face carried the same desperate question. Had their young prince survived? As the gates slowly opened, Lucian stirred again. Still weak, he reached toward the window of the litter and looked at the familiar city beyond. Home, he whispered. Arya smiled warmly. Yes, we made it. The little prince looked back at her with surprising seriousness. You are coming too. Arya hesitated. I do not think that is my decision. Before Lucian could answer, the procession stopped. Waiting at the top of the palace steps stood a woman dressed in deep blue mourning robes. Her silver blonde hair shimmered beneath the morning light, but her face carried the exhaustion of someone who had not slept since her child disappeared. Queen Elena, Luna of the royal pack and mother of Prince Lucian, did not wait for ceremony. The moment she saw the litter, she ran down the steps. The guards parted instantly. Kale stepped aside without a word. Elena fell to her knees beside her son, gathering him into her trembling arms. Tears streamed freely down her face as she whispered his name again and again. Lucian weakly wrapped his little arms around her neck. I missed you, Mama. Every warrior lowered his head. Even Marcus quietly looked away. After a long moment, Elena noticed the bandages covering her son's shoulder. Her eyes filled with fresh fear. Who saved him? She asked softly. The courtyard became silent. Dozens of eyes slowly turned toward the young Omega standing quietly at the edge of the procession, trying not to draw attention to herself. Kale spoke before anyone else could. Her name is Arya Whitmore. Elena looked at Arya through tears of gratitude and exhaustion. She took one slow step forward. Arya instinctively bowed her head, expecting to be questioned like every outsider before a queen. Instead, Elena reached out and gently took both of Arya's hands into her own. Thank you, she whispered, her voice breaking, for giving my son the chance to come home. Before Arya could answer, a sharp voice echoed across the courtyard. Your Majesty. An elderly council member hurried down the palace steps carrying a sealed scroll. He stopped before Cedric and whispered something urgently into his ear. Cedric's expression did not change, but his eyes darkened almost imperceptibly. He slowly unfolded the scroll, glanced at its contents, then lifted his gaze toward Arya with quiet satisfaction. Whatever had just arrived, it was news he had been waiting for. Cedric folded the scroll with deliberate care before slipping it inside his sleeve. Your Majesty, he said with practiced humility, the council has received troubling information from the eastern settlements. Kale's expression remained unreadable. It can wait. Cedric smiled politely. Ordinarily, I would agree. Unfortunately, this concerns the young woman who now stands beside the future king. Every eye in the courtyard turned toward Arya. She instinctively stepped back, confused by the sudden attention. Cedric slowly withdrew the scroll once more. According to the settlement registry, Arya Whitmore does not exist. A murmur spread through the gathered nobles. Arya frowned. That cannot be right. Cedric continued without looking at her. No birth record. No family registry. No sponsorship by any recognized pack. Not even a travel permit. Marcus crossed his arms. Many unclaimed Omegas live beyond official records. True, Cedric replied smoothly. But there is more. He unfolded the final page. 20 years ago, an infant disappeared during a raid on a border sanctuary. Witnesses described the child as a fair-haired girl wearing a silver pendant shaped like a crescent moon. Arya's heartbeat quickened. Silver pendant? She unconsciously touched the empty cord around her neck beneath her dress. It had broken years ago, and she had long forgotten where she had lost the pendant itself. Cedric noticed the movement. Interesting, he said quietly. Cale stepped forward, placing himself almost imperceptibly between Cedric and Arya. Enough. Cedric bowed slightly. I merely believe your majesty deserves every available fact. Before Cale could respond, Queen Elena spoke for the first time since embracing her son. Facts. Her voice was calm, but every noble in the courtyard immediately fell silent. She turned toward Cedric. The only fact I witnessed today is that this young woman carried my son through the wilderness while my own guards failed to protect him. Cedric inclined his head respectfully. No one questions her courage, your majesty. Then stop questioning her character before the investigation has even begun. Elena's words landed with quiet authority. Arya lowered her eyes, overwhelmed by the unexpected defense. She had spent years being judged before anyone bothered to know her name. Now the queen herself was standing beside her. Cale watched Arya carefully. There was no triumph in her face. No satisfaction. Only confusion and quiet discomfort at becoming the center of an argument she had never wanted. That, more than anything Cedric had said, strengthened his growing instinct that she was telling the truth. Just then, the royal healer emerged from the palace entrance. Your Majesty. His face carried cautious optimism. The prince's fever has begun to fall. Relief swept across the courtyard. Elena closed her eyes in gratitude. Cale allowed himself the smallest breath. He is asking for Arya, the healer added. The courtyard fell silent again. Cedric's smile disappeared. Cale looked toward Arya. Would you go to him? She blinked. If his mother permits. Elena reached out and gently squeezed Arya's hand. Please. Moments later, Arya entered the royal chamber. Sunlight filtered through tall windows onto the small bed where Lucian rested beneath embroidered blankets. His face remained pale, but his breathing was steadier than before. When he saw Arya, a tired smile appeared. You came. She sat beside him. I promised I would. Lucian reached beneath his pillow and slowly pulled out a small object wrapped in faded blue cloth. I wanted to give you this before everyone starts arguing again. Arya carefully unfolded the fabric. Inside lay half of an ancient silver medallion engraved with the same crescent moon she had seen on the prince's pendant. She stared at it in stunned silence. Where did you get this? Lucian frowned as though searching through a distant memory. Father gave it to me. His voice became barely above a whisper. He said, one day, I would meet the girl who carried the other half. Arya felt the room begin to spin. The other half. Before Lucian could answer, the chamber door opened abruptly. A palace guard hurried inside, breathing hard. He bowed deeply toward Cale, who had just entered behind Arya. Your Majesty, we have captured one of the Shadow Hawks alive. The guard swallowed. Before losing consciousness, he spoke only one sentence. Cale's golden eyes narrowed. What did he say? The guard hesitated. He said, do not let Lord Cedric find the Omega before she remembers her real name. The chamber fell silent. Even the crackling fire seemed to fade beneath the weight of the guard's words. Cale did not speak immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the messenger, searching for any sign of panic or exaggeration. There was none. Repeat it, the king ordered. Exactly. The guard swallowed hard. The prisoner said, do not let Lord Cedric find the Omega before she remembers her real name. Those were his final conscious words before the healer sedated him. Lucian's small fingers instinctively tightened around Arya's hand. She barely noticed. Her thoughts had become a storm of unanswered questions. Real name? The silver medallion resting in her palm suddenly felt much heavier than metal should. Cale slowly closed his hand around the hilt of his sword. No one speaks of this outside this room, he said quietly. Not until I question the prisoner myself. The guard bowed. Yes, Your Majesty. As soon as the door closed, Elena looked from Cale to Arya with growing concern. There is something none of us understands. Arya shook her head. I wish I could answer you. I truly do. She lifted the broken medallion. I have no memory of ever seeing this before today. Lucian studied the silver piece with surprising focus for a child still recovering from poison. Father always kept the other half hidden, he whispered. He told me it belonged to someone who would protect the kingdom one day. Cale looked toward the medallion. Your father never told me that. Lucian offered a weak smile. He said it was a secret. Before anyone could respond, hurried footsteps echoed outside. Marcus entered without ceremony, his usually composed expression replaced by visible urgency. "Your Majesty, you need to see this." Cale followed him into the palace corridor. Several guards stood around a wooden chest that had just arrived from the royal archives. Dust covered its iron fittings, and the royal seal had not been broken for decades. Archivist Rowan insisted this be delivered immediately, Marcus explained. He said it contains records from the border sanctuary destroyed 20 years ago. Cale broke the seal himself. Inside lay dozens of aging scrolls tied with faded blue ribbon. Beneath them rested a leather journal bearing the crest of the former king. Carefully opening the first pages, Cale found detailed reports describing the sanctuary where orphaned Omega children had once been protected under royal law. Most entries were routine. Then one page stopped him cold. Across the top, written in the former king's own hand, were 7 words. "Only one child must never be found." Marcus leaned closer. Who was the child? Cale turned the brittle page. The ink had faded, but one sentence remained perfectly readable. "If Blackthorn learns the girl's identity, the bloodline ends." Marcus's face drained of color. Blackthorn. Cale closed the journal. Cedric's family. At that exact moment, neither of them noticed a young palace servant quietly leaving the hallway with a basket of fresh linens. She walked calmly until she rounded the nearest corner. Then her pace quickened. Minutes later, she entered a secluded tower chamber where Lord Cedric stood alone beside an open window overlooking the city. Without a word, she handed him a folded note. Cedric read it once. His pleasant smile disappeared. He walked to the fireplace, holding the note above the flames until it turned to ash. "So," he murmured softly, "the old journal has finally resurfaced." He looked toward the palace courtyard where Arya could just be seen through the distant windows, sitting beside the recovering prince. His cold gray eyes narrowed. "You were supposed to disappear with the sanctuary." Turning to the shadowed corner of the room, he addressed a hooded figure waiting silently in the darkness. "Prepare the ravens." The figure bowed. "Alive or dead?" Cedric answered without hesitation. "The king must keep believing he can protect her." His smile slowly returned. "Make sure he discovers that he cannot." Teep. The Raven agents moved only after sunset. Hidden beneath plain travel cloaks, they slipped through the outer districts of Ashford Keep like ordinary merchants returning home before the city gates closed. No one noticed the identical silver rings concealed beneath their gloves. No one recognized the tiny black feather stitched inside each collar. They had served the Blackthorn family for generations, and their greatest talent was remaining invisible until it was too late. Inside the palace, Arya stood quietly beside the wide window of the prince's chamber, watching lanterns slowly illuminate the streets below. For the first time in years, she found herself surrounded by warmth instead of suspicion. Servants had brought clean clothes. The royal healer had insisted she eat. Even the queen herself had thanked her twice before leaving to meet with the council. Yet none of it felt real. She still saw the frightened little boy she had found beneath the broken trees. She still heard him asking for his mother. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. Cale entered alone. Without armor, he seemed different somehow. Still powerful, still carrying the quiet confidence of a king, but less distant than the man who had first pointed a spear at her in the forest. He stopped several feet away, careful not to invade the space of someone who had clearly spent much of her life learning to expect danger. "How is he?" Arya asked softly. "Sleeping," Cale answered. "The healer believes the poison has finally stopped spreading." Relief washed across her face. Cale noticed it immediately. She smiled for the prince before she smiled for herself. That simple truth unsettled him more than any mystery surrounding her past. "Thank you," he said. Arya looked up in surprise. "You have already thanked me." "Not enough." Cale's voice remained calm. "Most wolves would have saved themselves." Arya lowered her eyes. "Then I hope I never become most wolves." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Cale reached into his coat and placed the broken silver medallion on the nearby table. "May I ask you something?" Arya nodded. "Do you remember your parents?" She frowned, searching memories that felt more like fragments of old dreams. "Only pieces." "Tell me." She closed her eyes. "A woman's voice singing when I could not sleep." She hesitated. A man lifting me onto his shoulders so I could watch white birds flying over a lake. Her expression grew uncertain. Then fire. She opened her eyes again. After that, nothing. An old healer found me wandering near the border. He gave me the name Arya because I could not remember my own. Kale listened without interruption. Every word matched the scattered clues hidden inside the recovered journal. Before he could respond, hurried footsteps echoed down the corridor. Marcus appeared in the doorway, breathing harder than Kale had ever seen. Your Majesty. What happened? Marcus glanced briefly toward Arya before answering. The Shadow Hawk prisoner is dead. Kale's eyes narrowed. How? No one knows. He was speaking to the royal guard one moment. Marcus paused grimly. Then every torch in the dungeon went out. By the time they were relit, his cell was locked from the outside, but he was already gone. Gone. Dead. Marcus lowered his voice. And carved into the stone beside him was the black raven symbol. Kale's expression hardened instantly. Only one organization used that mark. The Ravens. Professional agents who erased witnesses before they could testify. Someone had silenced the only man who could identify the mastermind behind the prince's attack. Arya watched the two men carefully. Does this mean? She began quietly. Kale finished the thought for her. It means whoever planned this is closer than we believed. Before another word could be spoken, a frightened maid rushed into the corridor carrying a folded piece of parchment she claimed had been slipped beneath the prince's chamber door only moments earlier. Marcus opened it first. His face lost all color. He silently handed it to Kale. Written across the page in elegant black ink was a single sentence. If the Omega sleeps inside this palace tonight, the prince will not see another sunrise. No one in the room spoke for several long seconds. Kale read the note again, his expression never changing, but Marcus knew that silence well. It was the silence that came before the Alpha King made a decision no one could reverse. He folded the parchment once, then handed it to Marcus. Seal the prince's chambers, he ordered. No one enters without my permission. Marcus nodded immediately. Yes, Your Majesty. Double the guards. Already done. Triple them. Marcus hesitated only a heartbeat before bowing again. At once, the beta disappeared down the corridor, barking commands that echoed through the palace. Arya remained standing beside the window, staring at the empty doorway. This is happening because of me, she whispered. Kale turned toward her. No. If I leave tonight. No. His voice was calm but absolute. The letter is meant to make you believe that. Arya looked down at her hands. But what if they are telling the truth? Kale walked to the window beside her. Below, hundreds of lanterns glowed across Ashford Keep, each one representing a family that believed their king could keep them safe. He had carried that responsibility for years. He knew fear when he saw it. He also knew manipulation. Whoever wrote this, Kale said quietly, needs you to run. Arya frowned. Why? Because a frightened person makes mistakes. He looked directly into her eyes. You have survived every trap they placed before you because you stayed where your heart told you to stay. Arya was silent. Kale continued. In the forest, you stayed with Lucian. Yes. When my warriors surrounded you, you stayed with Lucian. She nodded. When everyone accused you, you stayed with Lucian. Another nod. So why would you abandon him now? Arya closed her eyes. The question settled deep inside her. He was right. Every important choice she had made came from protecting someone else, not protecting herself. I will stay, she said softly. Good. Kale allowed himself the faintest smile. Because I was not asking. Before Arya could respond, the chamber door opened again. Queen Elena entered carrying a small velvet box. She dismissed the attendants with a gentle gesture before walking directly toward Arya. My husband gave this to me many years ago, she said. Opening the box revealed a delicate silver bracelet engraved with tiny crescent moons. It has protected every child of our family since the first Alpha King. Arya stepped back. Your Majesty, I cannot accept something so valuable. Elena shook her head. This is not a reward. She carefully fastened the bracelet around Arya's wrist. It is a promise. Arya looked up in confusion. Elena smiled through tired eyes. As long as you wear the protection of this house, anyone who wishes to harm, you must first answer to me. Emotion caught in Arya's throat. She had never owned anything precious, let alone received a gift from a queen. Before she could thank her, a loud bell rang somewhere deep within the palace. Once. Twice. 3 times. Marcus's voice thundered from the courtyard below. Close every gate. Guards rushed across balconies and staircases. Heavy iron doors slammed shut one after another. Cale moved instantly toward the balcony overlooking the palace grounds. From the highest tower, flames suddenly burst into the night sky. Not the orange glow of an accidental fire, but thick black smoke rising from the royal archives. Marcus reached the king moments later, breathing hard. Your Majesty. Report. The archives are burning. Cale's expression darkened. The old journal. Marcus nodded grimly. Everything connected to the sanctuary records was stored there. Cale looked toward the towering column of smoke climbing into the night. Someone was destroying evidence. Someone inside the palace knew exactly which records threatened them. Then another guard came running across the courtyard below, shouting loud enough for every soldier to hear. The archives were locked from the inside. His next words froze the blood of everyone listening. And one of the bodies we found is wearing the uniform of the royal archivist who delivered the journal this morning. The courtyard erupted into controlled chaos. Bells echoed from every tower as guards raced toward the burning archives, forming desperate lines to carry buckets from the palace wells. Sparks climbed into the night like a swarm of fiery insects, illuminating the stone walls in flickering orange light. Cale did not move. His eyes remained fixed on the thick column of smoke twisting into the sky. Whoever had planned this knew exactly where the evidence was kept, exactly when the palace would be distracted, and exactly how long it would take for the flames to consume centuries of royal records. This was no accident. It was precision. Marcus returned only minutes later, ash streaking his face and cloak. The fire started in 3 different rooms at the same time, he reported. 2 coordinated for a single intruder. Cale nodded once. Casualties. Marcus's expression darkened. 3 guards unconscious. The royal archivist. He hesitated. He was already dead before the fire began. Cale's jaw tightened. Murdered. Marcus slowly nodded. The healer believes so. A heavy silence settled between them. The archivist had risked everything to deliver the journal that morning. Now he was gone before he could answer a single question. Cale looked toward the burning tower once more. Seal the city. Marcus blinked. The entire capital. No one leaves Ashford Keep until I know who ordered this. Yes, Your Majesty. As Marcus hurried away, Cale sensed someone behind him. Arya stood quietly in the palace doorway, wrapped in the queen's wool cloak. She had witnessed the smoke rising above the rooftops, and the concern in her eyes was unmistakable. They destroyed the records, she said softly. Cale looked at her. Most of them. Arya lowered her head. Because of me. Cale stepped closer, his voice calm but firm. No. If I had never come here, then Lucian would have died alone in the forest. Arya fell silent. Cale continued. Whoever is behind this fire feared the truth more than they feared burning a royal archive. That means you are not the danger. He held her gaze. You are the answer. Before Arya could respond, the royal healer emerged from the prince's chamber carrying a small wooden box. Your Majesty, he said quietly. While cleaning the prince's clothing, I found this sewn into the lining of his traveling cloak. He carefully opened the lid. Inside rested a folded piece of parchment, protected from moisture by waxed cloth. Cale unfolded it with great care. It was a map, not of the kingdom, but of the northern frontier beyond the old sanctuary. One location had been marked with a tiny crescent moon. Beneath it, written in the late king's unmistakable handwriting, were 6 words. Truth sleeps beneath the white lake. Cale exchanged a glance with the healer. Did anyone else see this? No. Good. He folded the map again. Across the room, Arya's eyes remained fixed on the crescent symbol. A strange feeling stirred deep inside her chest. Not recognition exactly, more like an echo. For an instant she saw sunlight dancing across clear water. White birds lifting into the sky. A woman's laughter carried by the wind. Then the vision vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Arya pressed a hand against her temple. Cale noticed immediately. What is it? She frowned. When I saw the map, I remembered something. Tell me. A lake. Her voice was barely above a whisper. White flowers floating on the water. She closed her eyes, struggling to hold onto the fading image. Someone kept telling me. Her breathing quickened. If you are ever lost, follow the swans home. The room fell silent. The royal healer looked toward Cale with visible surprise. Your Majesty, there is only one place in the kingdom known for white swans. Kale slowly unfolded the map again. His finger rested upon the tiny crescent mark. White Lake. Before anyone could speak another word, an arrow shattered the palace window with a deafening crash. It struck the far wall and quivered violently. Tied beneath its iron head was a strip of black cloth marked with a single silver raven. Marcus rushed back into the room with drawn sword, followed by half a dozen guards. Kale calmly removed the message wrapped around the arrow. Only 5 words had been written in dark ink. She remembers. Kill her tonight. The shattered glass had barely finished falling when Kale crushed the message in his fist. Around him, the royal guard formed a protective circle without waiting for orders. Every sword left its sheath in the same smooth motion. Marcus strode to the broken window and scanned the palace roofs beyond the courtyard. No movement, he called. The archer is already gone. Kale did not answer. Whoever had fired the arrow had never intended to kill anyone. The shot had been perfectly placed between Arya and the prince's bed. It was a warning. Worse, it proved the enemy had eyes inside the palace. Someone had known exactly which room Arya occupied. Lock this wing down, Kale ordered. Every servant, every guard, every messenger who entered this floor since sunset is questioned. Marcus nodded once. Personally, as the guards hurried to obey, Arya continued staring at the words written on the strip of black cloth. She remembers. Kill her tonight. Her breathing slowed instead of quickening. Something about the sentence disturbed her for a reason she could not explain. They are afraid, she said quietly. Kale turned toward her. Afraid. If they only wanted me dead. She looked up. They would not care whether I remembered anything. The royal healer slowly nodded. She is right. Kale studied Arya for a long moment. She had spent her life believing herself ordinary, yet every step she took seemed to pull hidden enemies into the light. You remembered White Lake, he said. Can you remember anything else? Arya closed her eyes. At first there was only darkness. Then another fragment surfaced. Warm sunlight. White feathers drifting across blue water. A man's gentle laugh. She saw herself much smaller, holding someone's hand while walking across a stone bridge. Then she heard a voice, deep, calm, familiar. Never fear the moon, little star. One day it will lead you home. Arya's eyes flew open. Tears had gathered without her noticing. Someone called me. She struggled to catch the fading memory. Little star. The royal healer inhaled sharply. Kale immediately noticed. You recognize it. The old healer hesitated before answering. Only one man in the kingdom ever used that nickname. Who? The healer lowered his voice. The late King Aldrin. Silence filled the room. Even Marcus, who had just returned from posting additional guards, stopped in his tracks. Kale frowned. My father. The healer nodded slowly. Years ago, I overheard him speaking with a little girl near White Lake. He called her Little Star. I assumed she belonged to one of the noble families. Arya stared at him in disbelief. I have never met a king. Perhaps, the healer answered gently. You simply do not remember. Before anyone could continue, Queen Elena entered carrying Lucian, who insisted on walking despite still being weak. The little prince looked around the damaged chamber before his eyes settled on Arya. You are crying. Arya quickly smiled through her tears. Only a little. Lucian stepped toward her and carefully slipped his small hand into hers. Mama says people cry when their hearts are trying to remember something important. Elena looked at her son with quiet surprise before meeting Kale's gaze. Neither spoke, yet both understood the same truth. The child had sensed something the adults were only beginning to suspect. A knock sounded at the doorway. One of Kale's oldest captains entered, holding a velvet pouch sealed with the royal crest. Your Majesty, he said. This was recovered from the burned archives. Kale accepted it immediately. Inside lay a single object untouched by the flames, a gold signet ring blackened by smoke. The engraving on its face showed a crescent moon surrounding a single 8-pointed star. Arya gasped. Her fingers instinctively reached toward the ring before stopping halfway. I know that symbol. Every person in the room looked at her. How? Kale asked. Arya's voice trembled. Because. She swallowed hard as another forgotten memory burst into her mind. It was carved above the door of my home. Before anyone could react, a palace horn suddenly echoed across the city. Once, twice, 3 times. Marcus rushed to the balcony. his face turning pale as he looked toward the northern gate. Torches stretched across the darkness outside the walls like a river of fire. An army had arrived, and at its head flew not the banner of a neighboring kingdom, but the ancient silver wolf of the Elder Council itself. The palace horn continued to echo across the valley as every soldier on the northern wall rushed into position. From the highest balcony, Cale watched hundreds of torchlights flicker beyond the gates, stretching across the darkness like a second horizon. At their center flew the ancient silver wolf banner of the Elder Council, a banner that had not been raised outside a royal assembly in nearly 30 years. Marcus joined him moments later, tightening the straps of his armor. "This is no ordinary visit," he said quietly. Cale did not answer immediately. His attention remained fixed on the lead carriage slowly approaching the gate. Unlike the armored escorts surrounding it, the carriage itself bore no family crest, only the symbol of the council. Whoever had ordered this wanted to appear neutral. Cale knew better. Neutrality rarely arrived with 200 armed guards. Behind them, Arya stood near the chamber doorway, still holding the gold signet ring. The engraved crescent moon and 8-pointed star reflected the torchlight dancing through the broken window. Every time she looked at it, another faint echo stirred inside her mind. White stone walls, a garden filled with blue flowers, someone laughing as they lifted her into the air. She could almost reach the memory before it slipped away again like mist. Queen Elena gently rested a hand on her shoulder. "Do not force yourself," she whispered. "Memories return when they are ready." Arya nodded, though uncertainty clouded her expression. What if remembering only brings more danger? Elena smiled sadly. Sometimes the truth does exactly that. A palace steward entered and bowed deeply before Cale. "Your Majesty, the council requests immediate entry." Marcus frowned. "At this hour?" "They claim the matter cannot wait until sunrise." Cale slowly turned away from the balcony. "Open the gates." Marcus looked surprised. "Your Majesty? If they wished to attack, they would not announce themselves with banners." Cale's golden eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "This is theater." Minutes later, the grand hall filled with nobles, commanders, and council elders awakened from their beds. Candles illuminated towering marble columns, while rain tapped softly against stained glass windows. At the far end of the chamber stood the Alpha King's throne, carved from ancient ash wood. Cale remained standing rather than sitting. A king who expected conflict never greeted it from a chair. The massive doors opened. Lord Cedric entered first, elegant as always, followed by 6 senior elders dressed in ceremonial robes. Walking between them was an elderly woman whose silver hair reached almost to her waist. She leaned upon an oak staff carved with phases of the moon. The entire hall fell silent. Marcus whispered under his breath, "High Seer Miriam." Cale inclined his head respectfully. The High Seer had not left the Moon Temple in over 15 years. If she had traveled across the kingdom herself, something extraordinary had happened. Miriam's pale eyes slowly moved across the hall until they rested upon Arya. The old woman's hand tightened around her staff. For a long moment, she simply stared, as though looking at someone she never expected to see again. Then, to the astonishment of every noble present, the High Seer walked past the council, past Lord Cedric, and stopped directly before Arya. Without saying a single word, the elderly woman slowly knelt. Gasps echoed throughout the hall. No one of Miriam's position bowed to anyone except the reigning monarch. Cedric's calm expression cracked for the first time. "High Seer," he began carefully. Miriam raised one trembling hand, silencing him without even turning around. Her eyes never left Arya. Tears gathered in the corners of the old woman's eyes as she whispered a sentence that sent a chill through every soul in the chamber. "After 20 years," she said softly, "the moon's lost daughter has finally come home." Silence exploded through the hall. Arya instinctively stepped backward in confusion. "You know me?" Miriam slowly nodded. "Not by the name you were given." Her weathered hand reached toward the signet ring Arya still held. "I knew you by the name your father whispered the night he entrusted you to fate." The old woman's voice broke with emotion. "Princess Lyra Ashford." The world seemed to stop turning. No one breathed. No one moved. The title struck the grand hall like thunder rolling across the mountains. Princess Lyra Ashford. Arya stared at the High Seer, certain she had misunderstood. "No," she whispered. "You have the wrong person. Miriam slowly rose, her weathered hands trembling not from age, but from emotion. "I prayed for 20 years that I was wrong," she answered gently. "I prayed every full moon that the child we lost had found another life, another family, another name." Her eyes filled with tears, but I would know those eyes anywhere. Cale remained perfectly still. Every instinct urged him to question the old woman, yet another part of him, older than reason, remembered fragments of childhood. His father disappearing for days without explanation. Secret meetings held behind locked doors. The sudden destruction of the White Lake Sanctuary that everyone had called a tragic accident. He had accepted those stories because he had been only 13. Now they no longer fit together. Cedric stepped forward, his voice calm enough to hide the tension beneath it. "High Seer Miriam, surely grief has clouded your memory. The child perished during the sanctuary attack. The council confirmed it decades ago." Miriam turned toward him for the first time. The kindness vanished from her expression. The council confirmed what it wished the kingdom to believe. A ripple of whispers spread through the nobles lining the hall. Cedric's smile never faded. "These are dangerous accusations. Truth often is." The old woman lifted her staff. "Would you like me to remind everyone who insisted the sanctuary records be sealed?" Cedric did not answer. Instead, he looked toward Cale. "Your Majesty, with respect, the kingdom cannot be governed by forgotten legends and fading memories. This young woman herself remembers nothing." Arya lowered her eyes. "He is right," she admitted quietly. "I cannot even remember my own name." Miriam smiled gently. "Memory does not create truth, child. It only reveals it." She carefully reached into the sleeve of her robe and removed a tiny crystal vial suspended from a silver chain. Inside rested a single white flower petal that looked impossibly fresh despite the passing years. "Do you know what this is?" Arya shook her head. "It bloomed beside your cradle on the night you were born." The room fell silent once again. Miriam stepped closer and placed the vial into Arya's hands. The instant her fingers touched the cold glass, the world disappeared. She was no longer standing in the grand hall. She was a little girl running barefoot through a garden filled with white lilies. Laughter echoed behind her. A man with warm golden eyes chased after her before lifting her high into the air. "Careful, little star," he laughed. "You will fly higher than the swans." Another memory followed immediately. A beautiful woman knelt beside a lake, fastening a tiny silver pendant around Arya's neck. "If we are ever separated," the woman whispered, "follow the swans. They always find their way home." Then came fire, smoke, screams. Someone wrapped her in a blanket. Strong arms carried her through the darkness. A familiar voice whispered urgently into another man's ear. "Take Lyra. No matter what happens, she must never return until the ravens are gone." The memories struck one after another so quickly that Arya cried out and collapsed to her knees. Cale reached her before she hit the marble floor. "Arya." Her breathing became uneven. Tears streamed down her face as she clutched the crystal vial against her chest. "I remember," she whispered between broken breaths. "The lake." She looked up at Cale with eyes filled not only with confusion now, but recognition. "I know your father." A stunned silence swept through the hall. Cedric's face remained composed, but beneath the folds of his sleeve, his hand slowly tightened into a fist. 20 years of careful planning were beginning to unravel. And for the first time since Arya had entered the kingdom, he understood something that chilled even him. She was no longer simply a witness who had to be silenced. She was the last living heir to a secret powerful enough to destroy everything he had spent 2 decades building. The grand hall remained frozen long after Arya's words faded into silence. Cale kept one arm around her shoulders, steadying her as the memories continued to arrive in scattered fragments. She was trembling, not from fear, but from the overwhelming weight of a life she had never known belonged to her. Queen Elena knelt beside her, gently brushing loose strands of golden hair away from her face. "Do not force the memories," she whispered. "Let them come one at a time." Arya nodded weakly, clutching the crystal vial so tightly her knuckles turned white. Across the hall, the gathered nobles stared in disbelief. Some looked toward Cedric, others toward the High Seer. No one dared speak first. Finally, Cale broke the silence. "High Seer Miriam." His voice carried through the chamber with calm authority. "If what you have said is true, then explain everything. No riddles. No prophecy. Only the truth. Miriam inclined her head. The truth began 23 years ago, before your majesty inherited the throne. Every eye followed her as she slowly walked toward the center of the hall. Your father, King Aldrin, believed the kingdom could never know lasting peace while Omegas were treated as possessions instead of citizens. He quietly drafted a new royal charter that would recognize every wolf, regardless of birth, under the protection of the crown. Murmurs spread through the nobles. Such a law would have transformed the kingdom forever. Not everyone welcomed that vision, Miriam continued. Several powerful families feared losing the influence they had built over generations. Among them, she paused, her gaze settling upon Cedric. The House of Blackthorn. Cedric answered with composed politeness. You accuse my family of opposing reforms discussed more than 2 decades ago. Political disagreement is hardly treason. No, Miriam replied calmly. Murder is treason. The hall erupted into shocked whispers. Cedric's expression remained controlled, but Cale noticed the faint tightening of his jaw. It was the smallest crack he had ever seen in the elder's perfect composure. Miriam continued. The sanctuary at White Lake was not chosen by chance. It secretly sheltered children whose bloodlines could one day unite every pack under the new charter. Among them was Princess Lyra. Arya stared at the old woman, scarcely able to breathe. Why was I there? Miriam smiled sadly. Because your parents knew danger was coming. Another memory flashed through Arya's mind. A warm embrace. A woman kissing her forehead. A man's voice saying, You must be brave, little star. She pressed a trembling hand against her lips. The kiss. She remembered the kiss. Cale watched her closely. Every new memory carried genuine emotion, not rehearsed performance. Whatever else remained uncertain, one truth had become impossible to ignore. She believed what she was remembering because she was living it again. Before anyone could speak, the massive doors of the grand hall swung open. A young messenger stumbled inside, his cloak covered with dust from hard riding. He dropped to one knee before Cale. Your Majesty, urgent news from White Lake. The room instantly quieted. Cale stepped forward. Report. The messenger struggled to catch his breath. The old sanctuary. He swallowed. It still stands. Miriam closed her eyes in silent gratitude. Cale frowned. That is impossible. Every record says it burned to the ground. That is what everyone believed, the messenger replied. But after last night's storm, part of the hillside collapsed. It uncovered hidden stone buildings beneath the ruins. Marcus exchanged a stunned glance with the king. Hidden beneath the sanctuary, just as the map had suggested. The messenger continued. Our scouts entered the underground chambers at dawn. His voice grew quieter. They found dozens of untouched rooms and a sealed royal vault. Cale's heartbeat quickened. Was it opened? No, Your Majesty. The messenger looked directly at Arya. The inscription on the vault door says it can only be opened by the daughter of the moon and the house of Ashford. Every face in the hall slowly turned toward Arya. Even Cedric could no longer hide the shadow crossing his expression. If the vault truly contained what King Aldrin had hidden 20 years ago, then the kingdom's greatest secret had survived, waiting for the day its rightful heir finally found her way home. No one spoke. The messenger's final words echoed through the grand hall long after he had fallen silent. The daughter of the moon and the house of Ashford. Arya lowered her eyes to the crystal vial still resting in her trembling hands. Only yesterday, she had been an Omega with no family, no home, and no future beyond surviving another winter. Now an entire kingdom was looking at her, as though she carried the answers to questions buried for 20 years. Cale was the first to break the silence. Prepare horses, he said firmly. We leave for White Lake before sunrise. Cedric stepped forward immediately. Your Majesty, that would be unwise. Cale turned his golden eyes toward him. Explain. If the rumors spreading through this hall reach the neighboring packs, they will interpret your journey as an admission that the council concealed the truth. Panic will follow. Cale remained expressionless. Then perhaps the truth should have been revealed 20 years ago. A ripple of uneasy whispers spread among the elders. Cedric's smile became thinner. A king must think of stability. A king must think of justice, Cale answered. The two are not always the same. For the first time in many years, several council members lowered their eyes instead of looking towards Cedric for guidance. The balance inside the hall had begun to shift. Miriam quietly watched the exchange without speaking. She had waited decades to witness this moment. The old king's son was finally beginning to ask the questions his father had never lived long enough to answer. As preparations began, Queen Elena gently guided Arya toward a quiet sitting room overlooking the palace gardens. Moonlight spilled across the marble floor, illuminating rows of white roses blooming beneath the windows. Neither woman spoke for several moments. Finally, Elena poured warm herbal tea into 2 small cups before placing one into Arya's hands. "You have been carrying everyone else's pain since you arrived," she said softly. "Tonight, let someone carry yours for a little while." Arya looked down at the steaming cup. "I do not know who I am anymore." Elena smiled with quiet understanding. "You are the same young woman who crossed 12 miles of wilderness to save my son." She reached across the table and gently squeezed Arya's hand. "Whatever name you were born with, that woman has not changed." Tears filled Arya's eyes once again. She had feared that discovering her past would erase the person she had become. Elena's words eased that fear in a way no prophecy ever could. At that same moment, far below the palace, hidden beneath abandoned wine cellars that no royal servant remembered existed, Lord Cedric entered a stone chamber lit only by blue candles. Hooded figures silently rose as he approached. 20 ravens stood waiting. Veterans, assassins, men and women who had erased inconvenient truths across 3 kingdoms without leaving a trace. Cedric placed both hands upon an ancient stone table carved with the blackthorn crest. "The sanctuary has been uncovered," he said quietly. No one reacted. "The girl is remembering." Still, the ravens remained silent. Cedric's gray eyes hardened. "Tomorrow the king rides to White Lake." One of the hooded figures finally spoke. "Do we strike the convoy?" Cedric slowly shook his head. "No." He looked toward a faded map spread across the table. His finger rested upon the hidden royal vault beneath the sanctuary. "If they reach the vault..." He paused. "Everything ends." Another raven asked, "What lies inside?" Cedric was silent for a long moment. When he finally answered, even his voice carried the weight of old fear. "Proof." The room grew colder. Proof that the Ashford bloodline was never the only bloodline chosen to rule. Back inside the palace, Cale stood alone in his father's private study. Dust-covered shelves that had remained untouched since the old king's death. He slowly walked toward the window where Aldrin had often stood overlooking the city. As a boy, Cale had never understood why his father sometimes stared toward the distant mountains with such sadness. Now he thought he finally did. His eyes fell upon an unfinished chessboard resting on a nearby table. The pieces remained exactly as they had the day his father died. Cale frowned. One move seemed strangely wrong. He reached down and lifted the White King. Beneath it lay a folded piece of parchment hidden inside the board itself. His heartbeat quickened. Carefully unfolding the yellowed paper, he found only a single sentence written in his father's unmistakable hand. "If Lyra returns, trust her heart before you trust anyone else's words." Cale closed his eyes for a brief moment. Then he folded the note and slipped it inside his coat. Outside the study window, the first light of dawn began touching the eastern mountains. Somewhere beyond those peaks waited White Lake, and a royal vault that had remained sealed for 20 years. None of them knew that another group was already riding toward the sanctuary under the cover of darkness, determined to reach the vault first, even if they had to bury its secrets forever beneath stone and blood. Before the first rays of sunlight reached the palace walls, the royal courtyard had already come alive. Stable hands saddled horses in silence. Elite guards inspected weapons with disciplined precision. No banners were raised. No trumpets sounded. Cale wanted this journey remembered by as few people as possible. The fewer who knew about White Lake, the greater the chance they would reach the sanctuary before Cedric's network realized how much had already been uncovered. Arya stepped into the cool morning air, wearing a simple riding cloak Queen Elena had chosen for her. The silver bracelet remained around her wrist, hidden beneath the sleeve. She paused at the top of the palace steps, looking toward the eastern horizon where soft light slowly painted the mountains in shades of gold. The same mountains she had crossed only 2 days earlier without knowing they had once been part of her own childhood. "Nervous?" Cale asked as he approached, fastening the clasp of his dark traveling cloak. Arya smiled faintly. "A little." "Good." She looked at him in surprise. Good. Only fools are never nervous before walking into the unknown. A hint of warmth touched his expression. Courage is choosing to walk anyway. Arya studied him for a moment before laughing softly. You are not at all like the stories people tell about you. Kale raised an eyebrow. And what stories are those? That the Alpha King never smiles. Most days, they are correct. And today? Kale glanced toward Lucian, who insisted on standing beside Queen Elena despite still recovering. The little prince waved enthusiastically at Arya. Kale's stern expression softened almost imperceptibly. Today seems different. Before Arya could answer, Marcus rode into the courtyard. The escort is ready. Kale nodded. We leave now. The gates of Ashford Keep opened quietly, allowing only 12 riders to pass. No royal carriage. No ceremonial guard. Just the king, Marcus, Arya, the royal healer, 6 trusted warriors, and 2 scouts riding well ahead of the group. From a tower window high above, Cedric watched them disappear into the morning mist. His face revealed nothing, but his fingers rested upon the stone ledge with unusual tension. A raven appeared silently behind him. They have departed. Cedric did not turn around. And our people? Already ahead of them. Good. His gaze remained fixed on the distant road. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary. The raven hesitated. You said the vault must never be opened. Cedric nodded slowly. Correct. Then why wait? Cedric's expression became thoughtful. Because I need to know what the girl remembers before she reaches it. Hours later, the royal party entered the northern forest. The deeper they traveled, the quieter the world became. Ancient pines stretched high above them, their branches forming a green canopy that allowed only scattered shafts of sunlight to reach the forest floor. Birds sang briefly before falling silent again. Even the horses seemed uneasy. The royal healer slowed beside Arya. Do you recognize anything? She looked around carefully. At first, everything appeared unfamiliar. Then she noticed a weathered stone beside the trail. Half buried beneath moss was the carving of a tiny 8-pointed star. Her heartbeat quickened. Stop. Kale immediately raised his hand. The column halted. Arya dismounted and slowly approached the stone. She knelt, brushing away years of moss with trembling fingers. More carvings emerged. A crescent moon. A swan. An 8-pointed star. Suddenly, another memory returned. She was 6 years old, laughing as she jumped from one carved stone to the next while an older man pretended he could not catch her. Every marker leads home, little star, he had said with a smile. Even if you forget the way. Tears gathered in Arya's eyes. I have been here. Kale stepped beside her. You are certain? She nodded. These markers. She touched the carved swan. They were placed so children would never become lost. Marcus looked around uneasily. Then we are close. One of the forward scouts suddenly galloped back through the trees, his horse breathing hard. He barely slowed before shouting, Your Majesty. Kale turned sharply. Report. White Lake is less than half a mile ahead. The scout's expression darkened. But we are not the first to arrive. Every warrior instinctively reached for a weapon. How many? Marcus asked. I counted at least 30 riders. The scout swallowed. And they are already inside the sanctuary ruins. Kale's expression hardened the instant the scout finished speaking. 30 riders inside the sanctuary meant only one thing. They had been expected. Did they see you? The king asked. No, Your Majesty. I circled from the western ridge. They are focused on the ruins. Marcus guided his horse closer, lowering his voice. Cedric's people? No banners, the scout answered. But several wore black cloaks with silver raven clasps. Marcus did not need to say another word. Everyone understood. The ravens had arrived first. Kale looked toward the narrow trail leading deeper into the forest. If we charge the main entrance, they will destroy whatever is inside before we reach it. Arya stared silently at the distant line of ancient pines. A strange pulse settled over her heart, stronger than anything she had felt since leaving the palace. It was not fear. It was recognition. She slowly closed her eyes. Another memory surfaced. She was a little girl laughing beside White Lake while chasing a pair of swans across the grass. The older man walking beside her pointed toward a cluster of willow trees. Remember this, little star. Every sanctuary has one door everyone sees, and another that only family remembers. Arya's eyes opened instantly. There is another way. Every rider turned toward her. Are you sure? Kale asked. She hesitated only a moment before nodding. Not because I remember everything. She pointed toward the western ridge. I remember following white swans through a grove of willow trees. The royal healer's eyes widened. The willow path. Marcus frowned. I thought it was only a legend. It was never a legend, the healer replied quietly. The old king ordered it built as an emergency escape route beneath the sanctuary. Kale made his decision without hesitation. Marcus. Yes, your majesty. Take 4 men and remain visible near the main road. Marcus understood immediately. Draw their attention. Exactly. A determined smile crossed the beta's face. They will think the king came with the obvious route. Kale nodded once. The rest of us follow Arya. Within minutes the group split apart. Marcus and 4 elite warriors rode openly toward the ruined sanctuary, allowing their horses to be seen through the trees. The remaining riders quietly followed Arya across uneven ground where no road remained. Thick ivy covered broken stone walls hidden beneath decades of forest growth. Birds scattered as they pushed deeper into the forgotten woodland. Suddenly Arya stopped. Before her stood 3 enormous willow trees growing so closely together that their trunks formed a natural arch. Long silver-green branches brushed the ground like curtains. Her heartbeat quickened. This is it. She stepped forward almost instinctively, gently parting the hanging branches with both hands. Behind them stood a weathered stone doorway almost completely hidden by moss. Above the archway remained the same symbol engraved on the ring Kale had found beneath his father's chessboard, a crescent moon surrounding an 8-pointed star. The royal healer whispered in amazement. After all these years, Kale approached the ancient entrance. Unlike the main sanctuary ruins, this place showed no sign of disturbance. No footprints. No broken vines. The ravens had not found it. Arya slowly placed her fingertips against the cold stone. The moment her skin touched the engraved star, a deep rumble echoed beneath the earth. Dust drifted from the archway. Hidden gears, silent for 2 decades, grown back to life. Before anyone could react, the stone doorway slowly slid aside, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. A rush of cool air escaped from below, carrying the faint scent of old cedar and wild lilies. Kale exchanged a stunned glance with the healer. The entrance had recognized her. Arya stared into the darkness, her heart pounding. Somewhere below waited the truth she had spent her entire life searching for. But before the first step could be taken, a distant horn suddenly echoed from the direction of the main sanctuary. Then another. Then the unmistakable sound of steel striking steel. Marcus had been discovered. The clash of steel echoed through the forest like distant thunder. Birds exploded from the treetops, and the sound of horses rearing carried faintly through the morning air. Marcus had done exactly what Kale expected. He had drawn every eye toward the main sanctuary. Kale looked once toward the distant battle, then back at the hidden stairway disappearing beneath the earth. Every instinct urged him to ride to his beta's side. Every lesson his father had taught him whispered something different. Protect the truth first. The kingdom can survive another battle. It cannot survive another buried secret. He made his choice. Marcus knows his duty, Kale said quietly. Now we must do ours. Arya nodded, though her eyes lingered on the distant ridge where smoke had begun rising above the ruined sanctuary. He will be all right, she whispered, sounding as though she were trying to convince herself as much as anyone else. Kale lit a lantern hanging beside the ancient doorway. The flame-illuminated stone steps worn smooth by countless footsteps long forgotten. Strange carvings covered the walls on both sides. Wolves standing beside humans beneath a full moon. Alpha and Omega children playing together without fear or rank. Arya slowly traced one carving with her fingertips. This, she murmured. This is wrong. Kale glanced toward her. Wrong. Not wrong. She searched for the right word. Forgotten. The royal healer smiled sadly. Before the Great Division, old stories said the packs lived differently. As they descended deeper beneath the sanctuary, the air grew cooler. The smell of damp earth gradually gave way to cedar wood and dried lavender, as though someone had carefully preserved the chambers despite 20 years of silence. At the bottom of the staircase stood another stone door, far smaller than the first. This one bore no lock. only a shallow imprint shaped exactly like the broken silver medallion Arya had received from Prince Lucian. She stared at it in surprise. The medallion. Kale immediately understood. Take it out. With trembling hands, Arya removed the half-medallion from the small pouch hanging around her neck. She carefully placed it into the stone recess. Nothing happened. The chamber remained silent. Arya frowned. It does not fit completely. The broken edge left half the circle unfinished. The royal healer slowly inhaled. Of course. Kale turned toward him. What? It was never meant to open with only one piece. Arya looked down at the incomplete symbol. The prince. Her eyes widened. Lucian still has the other half. Before anyone could speak, a faint click echoed somewhere inside the wall. Then another. The incomplete medallion began glowing with a soft silver light. The ancient mechanism had recognized the Ashford bloodline despite the missing piece. With a low rumble, the stone door slowly opened only halfway, leaving a narrow gap just wide enough for one person to pass. It is allowing us inside, Kale said quietly. Beyond the doorway lay a circular chamber unlike anything any of them had expected. There was no treasure, no royal throne, no weapons. Shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, filled with carefully sealed scrolls, journals, wax tablets, and leather-bound ledgers. At the center stood a simple cedar table upon which rested a crystal box untouched by dust. Above it hung a portrait of King Aldrin, not the stern monarch remembered by history, but a younger man smiling warmly while holding the hand of a little blonde girl no older than 5. Arya stopped breathing. The child in the painting wore the same silver pendant, the same bright eyes, the same smile she had glimpsed in her memories. That is, she whispered. The royal healer bowed his head. You. Tears welled in Arya's eyes. She slowly approached the portrait as though afraid it might disappear if she moved too quickly. Beneath the painting rested a brass plaque engraved with a single sentence. For Lyra, so she may one day know the truth from my own hand. Kale stepped toward the crystal box. Inside rested only one object, a sealed letter bearing his father's personal crest. Across the front, written in King Aldrin's unmistakable handwriting, were the words that made Kale's heartbeat quicken. To my son, and to my little star. Open only when you stand together. Cedric's voice echoed through the hidden passage with unnerving calm, as though he were greeting old friends instead of confronting a king. Open the vault, your majesty, he repeated. You have already read enough. Kale did not answer. His sword remained steady, its polished blade reflecting the lantern's glow as he stepped in front of Arya, almost without thinking. The movement did not escape her notice. Nor did it escape Cedric. A quiet chuckle drifted through the narrowing crack in the stone doorway. Interesting, the elder said. You are already protecting her before you even know whether she deserves it. I know enough, Kale replied. Do you? Cedric asked softly. Or have you simply inherited your father's greatest weakness? Silence settled over the chamber. Kale remembered those same words being whispered by nobles years ago after King Aldrin died. Too kind, too trusting, too willing to believe the best in people. As a young prince, Kale had spent years proving he could be harder than his father, stronger than his father, less willing to hesitate. Yet standing inside the sanctuary, surrounded by everything Aldrin had hidden to preserve hope instead of power, Kale suddenly wondered whether history had judged the wrong king. Cedric continued, his voice almost patient. Do you know why your father lost? No one answered. Because he believed compassion could defeat ambition. Another heavy blow struck the outer stone door. Dust showered from the ceiling. The ravens were using iron rams against the ancient entrance. Marcus's voice echoed from farther up the tunnel. The supports will not hold much longer. Kale glanced toward the royal healer. Is there another exit? The old wolf hesitated before nodding. There should be. He hurried toward the far side of the chamber, where faded carvings covered the wall behind King Aldrin's portrait. Running weathered fingers across the stone, he searched desperately for the hidden mechanism described only in forgotten stories. Arya remained staring at the portrait. Something about Cedric's words had awakened another memory. Not of fire, not of fear, of voices arguing. She closed her eyes. The chamber around her faded. She was a child again, hiding beneath a wooden table while adults spoke beyond the doorway. One voice belonged to King Aldrin. Calm, determined. Another voice was colder, sharper. The child cannot remain alive, the second man had said. As long as both bloodlines exist, there will always be another claim to the throne. Arya's breathing caught. She recognized that voice. It had grown older, slower, but it was unmistakable. Her eyes flew open. Kale. He immediately turned toward her. I remember him. Who? Cedric. Another impact shook the chamber. He was there. Arya's voice trembled. The night the sanctuary burned. Outside the door, Cedric's silence lasted only a heartbeat before he laughed quietly. Memory is a curious thing. His tone remained composed. Sometimes it tells comforting stories. Sometimes it invents them. Arya shook her head. No. She stepped around Kale, meeting the stone doorway as though Cedric stood directly before her. You argued with my father. The laughter stopped. You told him. Her voice grew steadier with every returning image. That peace makes kings weak. No answer came from beyond the wall. Kale watched Arya carefully. She was no longer guessing. She was remembering. Then Cedric finally spoke again, and for the first time since anyone had met him, warmth had vanished completely from his voice. You always listen more carefully than the adults realized. The chamber fell silent. Even Marcus, fighting above, seemed impossibly far away. Cedric had not denied it. He had confirmed it. Arya's heart pounded. Why? She whispered. Why did you destroy the sanctuary? A long pause followed. When Cedric answered, there was no hatred in his voice. Only conviction. Because kingdoms built upon kindness do not survive. Kale's grip tightened around his sword. Cedric continued. Your father dreamed of a realm where Alpha and Omega stood as equals. A beautiful dream. His voice hardened. Dreams do not stop invasions. Dreams do not command loyalty. Fear does. The royal healer suddenly pressed his hand against one of the carved stones. A deep click echoed through the chamber. Part of the rear wall shuddered and slowly began sliding open, revealing a narrow tunnel descending even deeper beneath the mountain. Fresh air drifted through the opening. Your Majesty, the healer called. The escape passage. Kale looked from the hidden tunnel to the cracking entrance where Cedric's forces continued pounding against the ancient door. He had only seconds to choose. Fight now, or protect the truth his father had sacrificed everything to preserve. Then, from somewhere beyond the hidden passage, a faint sound floated through the darkness. It was soft, gentle, the distant call of swans across open water. Arya turned toward the tunnel, tears filling her eyes once more. White Lake, she whispered. It is leading us home. Kale made his decision without another second of hesitation. Everyone through the passage, he commanded. Now, the royal healer hurried toward the newly opened tunnel, carrying the crystal box against his chest. Two royal guards immediately formed a shield around him. Arya remained where she stood, her eyes fixed upon King Aldrin's portrait one final time. She stepped forward and gently touched the frame. I found my way home, she whispered. I hope that is enough. Then she turned and followed Kale into the hidden passage. Behind them, another tremendous impact shook the sanctuary. Ancient cracks raced across the stone entrance like lightning through ice. Cedric's ravens were only moments away from breaking through. The narrow tunnel curved downward before gradually rising again, carved with astonishing precision through solid rock. Small shafts in the ceiling allowed narrow beams of sunlight to filter inside, proving the passage had been designed not merely as an escape route, but as a secret road known only to the royal family. As they hurried forward, Arya noticed faded paintings covering the walls. Children of every rank played beside White Lake. Alpha mothers embraced Omega infants. Elder wolves taught young cubs together beneath flowering trees. There was no separation, no fear, only one family. This was father's dream, Arya murmured almost unconsciously. Kale slowed beside her. You called him father. Arya stopped walking. She had not realized the word had escaped her lips. Another memory surfaced, not broken this time, but clear. King Aldrin kneeling beside her after she had fallen while learning to ride. He had lifted her gently into his arms instead of scolding her. A king is measured by how he helps people rise after they fall, little star. Never by how many fear him. Arya smiled through fresh tears. I remember his voice. Kale looked at her quietly. I almost do too. She turned toward him. What do you mean? He gave a faint, bittersweet smile. When I was young, I thought my father spent more time helping strangers than ruling his own palace. His eyes drifted toward the tunnel ahead. Only now am I beginning to understand that he believed those were the same thing. Before Arya could answer, Marcus's voice echoed faintly from somewhere behind them. Your Majesty. Cale spun around. A lone royal guard emerged from the darkness, breathing heavily. Captain Marcus sent me ahead. Report. He has collapsed the first section of the tunnel behind us. Cale frowned, with himself still outside. The guard nodded reluctantly. He said someone had to slow the ravens. Arya's face paled. We cannot leave him. He knew exactly what he was doing. Cale answered, though concern flickered across his normally controlled expression. Marcus had been at his side for 15 years. If the roles were reversed, Cale knew he would have made the same choice. The guard continued. Captain Marcus ordered me to tell you one more thing. Go on. Protect the future, my king. I can protect myself. Cale closed his eyes briefly before nodding once. He is stubborn. The guard allowed himself the smallest smile. Yes, your majesty. The tunnel gradually widened until sunlight suddenly flooded the passage ahead. They stepped out onto a hidden terrace overlooking White Lake. Every person in the group stopped in silent amazement. The lake shimmered beneath the afternoon sun like polished silver. Hundreds of white swans glided peacefully across the still water, exactly as they had in Arya's fragmented memories. Wild lilies covered the shoreline, their delicate fragrance carried by a gentle breeze. Time itself seemed unable to touch this place. Arya slowly walked toward the water's edge as though guided by something older than memory. One magnificent swan separated itself from the others and glided directly toward her. Cale watched silently. The bird showed no fear. When it reached the shore, it bowed its elegant neck before Arya, gently brushing its beak against the silver bracelet Queen Elena had placed on her wrist. The royal healer inhaled sharply. The guardian swan, he whispered. I thought they were only a legend. Arya knelt beside the lake. The clear water reflected not only her own face but the mountains beyond and the endless blue sky above. Then something caught her attention beneath the surface. A shape, round, metallic, half buried beneath smooth white stones. Without thinking, she reached into the cool water and lifted it free. It was another silver medallion, perfectly preserved despite the passing years. Unlike the broken half Lucian had given her, this one was complete. Across its surface were engraved two names intertwined beneath a crescent moon. Cale, Lyra. Arya stared at the inscription in stunned silence. Cale stepped beside her, equally astonished. Before either of them could speak, the peaceful cries of the swans were shattered by the distant blast of a hunting horn echoing across the lake. The ravens had found the second passage. The hunting horn echoed a second time, louder than before. The peaceful surface of White Lake rippled as the flock of swans lifted into the air, their white wings flashing against the blue sky. Cale drew his sword and stepped instinctively in front of Arya. Across the lake, dark figures emerged from the trees one after another. Ravens, nearly 40 of them. At their center rode Lord Cedric, no longer hiding behind the robes of a council elder. Clad in black armor etched with silver feathers, he looked less like a statesman and more like the commander he had once been. He guided his horse to the water's edge and looked across the lake toward Arya. So, he said calmly, the swans remembered you after all. Arya tightened her grip on the completed medallion. You knew it would be here. Cedric nodded. For 20 years. Cale's voice remained steady. Then why did you never open the vault yourself? Cedric smiled faintly. Because it was never built for me. His gray eyes settled on the medallion in Arya's hand. Some doors answer only blood. For a long moment, no one moved. The breeze carried only the distant cries of the swans circling overhead. Then Cedric slowly dismounted, leaving his sword sheathed. Do you know what your father truly planned? He asked Arya. She met his gaze without lowering her own. He planned a kingdom where no child would be judged by birth. Cedric almost laughed. No. He planned to erase the old order completely. He turned toward Cale. Your father intended to unite the Ashford line with the Moon bloodline through her. A single royal house. No council. No balance of power. One family with absolute authority. Murmurs spread among the ravens. Even Cale looked toward Arya in surprise. Cedric continued. Do you finally understand? I was not protecting my family. I was protecting the kingdom from becoming the possession of one bloodline. Arya looked down at the medallion. Another memory surfaced, not of arguments or fire, but of King Aldrin kneeling before a table covered with maps while speaking to her mother. No crown should belong to blood alone, he had said. One day the people must choose their rulers, not simply inherit them. Arya slowly lifted her head. You only heard half of his dream. Cedric's expression changed ever so slightly. What? He never wanted one family to rule forever. Her voice grew stronger with every word. He wanted a kingdom where power answered to justice. She looked directly into Cedric's eyes. That is why he wrote the royal charter. Silence fell over the shoreline. The royal healer stepped forward carrying the crystal box. From inside, he carefully removed a second parchment hidden beneath the first letter. Your Majesty, he whispered. There was another page. Cale unfolded it. His eyes quickly scanned the writing before he looked up at Cedric with quiet disbelief. My father abolished hereditary succession. Every face turned toward the king. Cale continued reading aloud. When peace is secure, every future king or queen shall be confirmed by the great assembly of all pacts, so that the throne serves the people rather than itself. Cedric's calm composure finally cracked. Impossible. Cale held the document high enough for everyone to see the royal seal. He was not creating absolute power. His gaze hardened. He was preparing to limit it. Arya understood everything in that instant. Cedric had never feared her family because they wanted more power. He had feared them because they intended to share it. Around the lake, several ravens slowly lowered their weapons. They had served Cedric believing they were preserving the kingdom from tyranny. Now the truth standing before them was very different. One of the older captains removed the black feather clasp from his cloak and let it fall into the grass. Then another did the same. Cedric watched them in stunned silence. You swore an oath, he said quietly. The captain bowed his head. We swore to protect the kingdom. He looked toward Cale. Not a lie. At that very moment, the sound of galloping horses thundered from the forest behind the ravens. Marcus burst from the trees at the head of dozens of royal guards, his armor scarred and dust-covered, but his spirit unbroken. He reined his horse beside Cale with a broad grin. Sorry to keep you waiting, my king. Cale allowed himself a rare smile. I was beginning to wonder if you had taken the long way. Marcus laughed. I did, but I brought friends. One by one, the ravens stepped aside, no longer standing between the king and the truth that had waited beneath White Lake for 20 years. For several long moments, no one moved. The only sound came from the swans gliding peacefully across White Lake, their reflections shimmering like silver beneath the afternoon sun. Cedric looked around slowly, watching loyal followers lower their weapons one after another. 20 years of certainty began slipping through his fingers, not because an army had defeated him, but because the truth had finally stepped into the light. He drew a slow breath before looking directly at Cale. You believe a single document changes history? Cale carefully folded King Aldrin's charter and returned it to the crystal box. No. His voice was calm. People change history. My father simply believed they deserved the chance. Cedric's shoulders sank ever so slightly. He was a dreamer. He was a king, Cale answered. And he trusted his people more than he trusted fear. Silence followed. Then, unexpectedly, Cedric smiled. It was not the polished smile of a politician. It was the weary smile of an old man carrying a burden too heavy for too many years. Do you know what frightened me most? He asked quietly. No one replied. Cedric looked toward the lake. I was a young commander when the Eastern Kingdoms invaded. I watched villages disappear in a single night. Children starved. Packs betrayed one another. Every act of kindness was answered with another act of cruelty. His eyes remained fixed on the water. I promised myself I would never allow weakness to destroy this kingdom again. Arya stepped forward. There was no anger in her expression, only compassion. Protecting people was never your mistake. Cedric slowly turned toward her. Then what was? Believing they could only be protected by fear. The old council leaders searched her face for a long time. The same face he had once seen as a frightened child running beside White Lake. The same face he had spent 2 decades trying to erase from history. Yet there was no hatred in her eyes. Only sadness. That realization wounded him more deeply than any accusation could have. Queen Elena and Prince Lucian arrived at the lakeshore moments later with the remaining royal escort. Against every recommendation of the healers, Lucian had insisted on coming. The little prince hurried across the grass as quickly as his recovering strength allowed. Arya, She immediately knelt to embrace him. Lucian wrapped his arms tightly around her neck before looking toward the completed silver medallion still resting in her hand. Smiling, he reached into his pocket and produced the broken half he had carried since leaving the palace. "I think this belongs with yours." Together they carefully joined the two pieces. A soft silver light shimmered where the broken edges touched. The crack disappeared completely, leaving a perfect circle engraved with a crescent moon embracing an 8-pointed star. Around the shoreline, the flock of swans lifted their voices in a gentle chorus, as though greeting an old promise finally fulfilled. The royal healer smiled through tears. "The house of Ashford has been made whole." Kale accepted the restored medallion from Arya and studied it quietly before placing it back into her hands. "No," he said with a faint smile. "It found the person who was always meant to carry it." Arya looked down at the silver emblem, then slowly shook her head. "Not alone." She extended the medallion toward Kale. "My father wrote that the future begins when we stand together." Kale looked into her eyes for a long moment before gently closing her fingers around it instead. Then, before the gathered wolves of every rank, before the council, the royal guards, the ravens, and the people who had witnessed the truth emerge from 20 years of silence, the Alpha King did something no one expected. He removed the royal crown from his own head and placed it upon the stone beside White Lake. Then he stepped forward and knelt before Arya. A gasp swept across the lakeshore. Kale lowered his head, not in surrender, but in respect. "Today," he said clearly enough for every soul present to hear, "I do not kneel before a bloodline." He lifted his eyes to meet hers. "I kneel before the woman whose compassion accomplished what armies, laws, and kings could not. You reminded this kingdom what strength truly looks like." Tears filled Arya's eyes. She reached down and gently touched his shoulder. "Please stand." Kale smiled. "Only if we build the future together." Around them, every royal guard lowered a fist over their heart. One by one, the former ravens did the same. Even the council elders slowly bowed their heads, not to a queen, not to a king, but to the truth that compassion had proven stronger than fear. Above White Lake, the swans circled once beneath the bright afternoon sky before gliding peacefully home. 1 year later, spring returned to White Lake with quiet certainty. The lilies once hidden beneath ash now covered the shoreline again, their white blossoms dancing gently in the morning breeze. Children laughed beneath the willow trees where silence had ruled for 2 decades. Alpha cubs chased butterflies alongside Omega children, their games untouched by the old divisions that had once shaped every life in the kingdom. Few of them even understood why the adults smiled whenever they saw them playing together. They only knew that White Lake had become the safest place they had ever known. The royal charter had been read aloud in every village, every pack, and every council hall across the realm. No Omega would ever again be treated as property. Every child, regardless of birth, would stand equal before the law. The Great Assembly had unanimously confirmed the charter, not because a king demanded it, but because the people themselves had chosen the future King Aldrin had dreamed of. Lord Cedric no longer sat among the council. At his own request, he withdrew from public life after giving a full account of the choices he had made and the secrets he had hidden. His final words before leaving the capital were remembered throughout the kingdom. "Fear kept us alive," he had said. "But compassion is what finally taught us how to live." Even those who disagreed with his past could see the weight of regret carried in the old man's eyes. Marcus had refused every grand reward offered to him. Instead, he accepted only one responsibility: rebuilding the royal guard into an order sworn to protect every citizen equally. Whenever young recruits asked why the first oath no longer mentioned rank or bloodline, Marcus would simply smile and point toward White Lake. "Because one Omega reminded us what we were meant to protect." Queen Elena visited the lake almost every week. She never arrived with ceremony, only with baskets of books, blankets, and homemade bread for the children. Every visit ended the same way. She would find Arya sitting beneath the old willow tree, surrounded by laughing cubs listening to stories about courage, kindness, and hope. Elena would gently kiss Arya's forehead before saying the words that always made her smile. "Come home for dinner, my daughter." Arya had stopped correcting her long ago. Nearby, Prince Lucian was no longer the frightened child rescued from the forest. Stronger now, He proudly helped younger cubs learn to swim along the quiet shores of the lake. Whenever anyone asked who had taught him bravery, he never pointed toward the royal palace. He always pointed toward the willow tree where a gentle omega with golden hair listened to every frightened child as though no fear was ever too small to matter. On the first anniversary of the charter, the entire kingdom gathered once more beside White Lake. There was no throne waiting beneath the open sky. No walls separated rulers from ordinary families. King Kale stood among his people wearing a simple dark cloak instead of ceremonial robes. He looked across the crowd until his eyes found Arya. She was exactly where he expected her to be, kneeling beside a little girl who had scraped her knee while running after the swans. Arya smiled, brushed away the child's tears, and placed a gentle kiss upon her forehead. The little girl laughed immediately before racing back to join her friends. Kale smiled to himself. Some things should never change. He walked quietly across the grass until he stood beside Arya. "There is one promise I have not yet kept," he said. Arya looked up with curious eyes. Kale reached into his coat and removed the restored silver medallion. Sunlight reflected from its polished surface as he held it between them. "A year ago," he said softly, "I asked you to build the future with me." He took a slow breath. "Today I ask something more." Without hesitation, he knelt upon the grass. Not because tradition required it, but because respect always begins with humility. "Arya Whitmore, Lyra Ashford, whatever name your heart chooses to keep, will you walk beside me for the rest of our lives?" Tears filled Arya's eyes as laughter, memories, and quiet moments from the past year rushed through her heart. She thought of the frightened cub in the forest, the spear falling into the grass, the hidden sanctuary, the swans, the letter from a father she had finally remembered. Above all, she thought of the man kneeling before her, not because he was a king, but because he had learned that true strength begins with compassion. Smiling through happy tears, she extended her hand. "Yes," she whispered. The crowd erupted in joyful applause as Kale gently placed the silver medallion into her hands instead of upon her neck. "This belongs to both of us," he said, "just like the future." As the celebration continued, Lucian laughed while releasing a pair of young swans onto the lake. They glided side by side across the shimmering water beneath the golden afternoon sun. Kale gently brushed a strand of hair away from Arya's face. Then, with the same tenderness she had once shown a frightened little cub in the darkest moment of his life, he leaned forward and kissed her softly on the forehead. Arya closed her eyes and smiled. Around them, the swans lifted gracefully into the sky. Years later, people no longer spoke first about conspiracies, hidden vaults, or the battles that had nearly divided the kingdom forever. They remembered something much simpler. They remembered the day an Omega girl kissed a dying cub's forehead, and how, in that single act of compassion, an entire kingdom found its way home.